The wedding planner had requested white peonies for every table, and Miriam had made sure they were perfect. That was the kind of owner she was. She did not simply authorize the florals budget and let the events team handle the rest. She walked the ballroom herself, the morning of a large booking, the way her mother had walked every room of every guest house she'd ever run, quietly, touching nothing, seeing everything, making sure the thing her name was quietly behind looked exactly the way she intended it to. She had straightened one centerpiece, adjusted a drape at the far window, and was on her way back to her private office on the 4th floor when the man being married in 7 hours walked through the lobby with his groomsmen, did not see her at first because he had not expected to see her anywhere near this hotel, and then did see her and called out to the duty manager and said, loud and immediately, "I don't know what she's doing here, but I need her removed from the premises before my guests arrive." His name was Aurelius. He was her husband. The wedding he was preparing for was not theirs. The woman he was marrying, in her ballroom, in 7 hours, in front of 300 guests he had not told her about, in a hotel he did not know she owned, was a woman named Celestine, who had been his private arrangement for 14 months, and who believed, genuinely, that she was marrying a single man. The duty manager, a composed young woman named Sandra who had worked Miriam's properties for 6 years, looked at Aurelius. Then she looked at Miriam. Miriam gave Sandra the small, almost imperceptible nod that Sandra had learned, over 6 years, meant handle nothing yet. Then she turned to her husband and said, pleasantly, "I'd love to speak with you for a moment, Aurelius. Privately, if you don't mind, before you finish deciding what to do with me." He did not understand that every person in that lobby worked for his wife. Let me tell you about a woman named Miriam Vos Delacroix. You would have walked right past her in that lobby and assumed she was attending the wedding, perhaps a friend of the family, early, overdressed for a Tuesday morning, too composed for the hour. That was always the trouble with Miriam. She moved through her own properties like a guest rather than an owner, because her mother had taught her that the best way to see a hotel clearly was to walk it like someone who hadn't built it. People looked at her and saw a woman comfortable in nice rooms. They did not see the woman who had built the rooms. Hold on to that. We are going to come back to it. To understand how a woman walks into the morning of her husband's secret wedding to another woman and does not raise her voice in the lobby, you have to go back, all the way back to a guest house with 12 rooms and a broken boiler, and a mother who ran it alone for 23 years and made it one of the most respected small hotels in the region through nothing but precision and the refusal to be discouraged by men who told her the hospitality business was not built for women who worked without a man's name on the deed. Before she was Mrs. Delacroix, she was Miriam Voss, and the Vosses ran a guest house on the edge of a market town that attracted the right kind of traveling trade if you managed it correctly, and the wrong kind if you didn't. Her mother, Ilse, had inherited the guest house at 34 from a husband who died before the mortgage was paid and left her with 12 rooms, 2 staff, a broken boiler, and the full knowledge that most people who met her assumed she would sell up within the year. She did not sell up. She fixed the boiler herself, with instructions borrowed from a library book and a plumber she paid in trade, and she ran those 12 rooms with such meticulous attention to the experience of every single guest that within 4 years she had a waiting list, and within 8 she had quietly bought the building next door. She taught Miriam the business the way you teach something that matters, slowly and completely, without shortcuts. She taught her that a hotel is not a building, it is a sequence of promises, and the difference between a good hotel and a great one is simply whether every person working in it understands what they've promised and keeps it. She walked Miriam through every room of the guest house once a week, every week, for 15 years, pointing at what was right and at what could be better, and she never once let Miriam look at the ledger without first looking at the rooms, because she said, the numbers only make sense if you've already walked the floor they came from. The week Ilse's health started to turn, she gave Miriam two things: a master key, the original one, from the year she'd opened, brass and heavy, that opened every room in the guest house, and that Ilse had carried on a chain around her neck every working day of her life. And a sentence she said only once, standing in the doorway of room 7, with the late light coming through the curtains the way it always did in the late afternoon, because Ilse was precise about the things worth saying once and certain about the things not worth saying twice. Every room in this house has been paid for with something it cost me to give, she said. Anyone who walks through this door does so because I allowed it. Remember that when people try to decide for you who belongs in your own rooms. Miriam kept the master key on a chain around her own neck from that day forward, under her collar, where no one could see it, including Aurelius, who had never once in 4 years of marriage asked about the small weight she carried there. Now hold that thought, because it is going to unravel everything before this script is through. She had studied hospitality management, then real estate finance, then spent 17 years building something her mother had lived just long enough to see begin. She had taken the Voss guest house and the quiet capital it generated, added strategic acquisition after strategic acquisition, always in markets where she understood the floor and the numbers in the same breath, and built what was now the Voss collection, 9 boutique hotels across 4 cities, each one run with the same precision her mother had applied to 12 rooms and a broken boiler, each one carrying the family name in letters small enough not to attract the kind of attention that brings the wrong kind of people through the door. The hotel Aurelius had booked for his secret wedding was the collection's flagship property. He had booked it because a colleague had told him it was the most beautiful event venue in the city. He had not thought to look at who owned it. He had not thought to look at much of anything that pertained to his wife's professional life in the 4 years of their marriage, because he had arrived at the comfortable conclusion, early and without evidence, that whatever she did moved quietly and below his horizon line and did not require his curiosity. He had been having an affair with Celestine for 14 months. She was 31, an interior designer, warm and generous, and entirely unaware that the man she was marrying had a wife who was alive and residing in the same city. He had told her he was divorced. He had told his family the same about Celestine, framing her to his mother and his brother as a woman he'd met after the marriage had quietly ended, which was a version of events requiring so many small, compounding lies that only a man deeply committed to a particular story could maintain it. His mother, Odile, had accepted the story because it was more comfortable than the question it required her to ask. His brother, Serge, had accepted it because Serge had always found it easier to follow Aurelius's lead than to examine where the road was actually going, as Celestine had no idea. That is the part that mattered most to Miriam. Standing in her own ballroom on a Tuesday morning, white peonies on every table, looking at the seating chart her events team had prepared for a wedding she had not known was happening until 48 hours ago, when a routine review of the following week's event bookings had surfaced a name on the groom's line that she had recognized immediately as her husband's full legal name, rarely used, unmistakable. She had sat with that information for 48 hours. She had not called Aurelius. She had not cancelled the booking. She had walked the ballroom that morning, the way her mother had walked every room of every guest house she ever ran, touching nothing, seeing everything, making sure the thing her name was behind looked exactly the way she intended it to, and she had straightened the centerpiece and adjusted the drape and been on her way to her office when the morning came to find her instead. Now watch close, because this is the part Sandra, who has worked 6 years on Miriam's properties and has never once told this story to anyone outside her own home, keeps in the front of her mind every time someone underestimates a quiet woman in a nice lobby. Aurelius called for removal. Miriam suggested privacy. She took him to the small meeting room off the lobby, the one with the original Voss guesthouse key mounted in a glass case on the wall that most guests assumed was decor, and she closed the door, and she sat down, and she let him try to explain, which took a while and produced nothing satisfying, and then she told him, in the unhurried voice of a woman who had already spent 48 hours deciding exactly what she wanted to say, the following things. She told him that the hotel they were sitting in belonged to her and had for 11 years and was the flagship of a collection of 9 properties that carried her family name, which he had never once asked about. She told him that his wedding booking had surfaced in a routine internal review 48 hours ago, that she had spent those 48 hours not panicking and not calling him, but consulting a lawyer and a private document service. She told him that she had, yesterday afternoon, engaged a legal process server who had attended the marriage license office and confirmed that the license Aurelius had filed listed himself as unmarried, which was not accurate, and that the wedding he had planned could not legally proceed today or on any other day while he remained her husband. She told him that she had arranged, through her events team, for Celestine to be met privately in the bridal suite upstairs by a woman from her staff who would give her, in the kindest possible way, the information she deserved to have before she walked down any aisle. She was not going to let Celestine walk into that ballroom, not knowing. That was the part Miriam was most certain about. Whatever else this morning cost her, she was not going to let another woman be humiliated in her own ballroom for the sake of a man's convenience. Then she took the chain from around her neck, removed the brass master key, and set it on the table between them. "My mother told me," she said, "that anyone who walks through her door does so because she allowed it. I allowed you through mine, Aurelius, for 4 years, and I am done allowing it now. This is my hotel. Those are my staff in the lobby. The ballroom with the white peonies is mine, and the 300 people you invited into it today are guests of this property, which means they are, whether they know it or not, my guests. You will not be getting married here. You are welcome to leave the same way you came in." She picked the key back up, put it back on the chain, put the chain back around her neck, and stood. Here is the thing the audience understands now that Aurelius, in all his appalled and cornered certainty, did not. He had walked into a hotel he believed was simply a venue and found it was the house his wife had built, staffed by people who answered to her, managed under her name, and containing, in an upstairs suite, the woman he had tried to marry there, who was being told the truth about him by someone Miriam had personally trusted with the conversation. The question hanging in the air was not what Aurelius would do next. The question was what Celestine would do, and Miriam had already made sure she would do it informed. She walked out of the bridal suite, through the lobby, past the white peonies and the groomsmen who had no idea what was happening, and through the front door of the hotel, and she did not look at Aurelius when she passed him. She looked at Miriam, who was standing near the front desk in the way she always stood in her own lobbies, quiet, composed, and fully in possession of every room she was in, and she said, "Thank you," and Miriam said, "I'm sorry." And they stood there for a moment in the shared understanding of two women who had both loved the same man more than he had been honest enough to deserve. And then Celestine walked out into the morning, and Miriam went back to her office, and the white peonies sat on their tables in the empty ballroom, perfectly arranged, because Miriam had straightened the last centerpiece herself, and she did not do anything halfway. Now the narrator has to tell you what balance looks like when it finally comes back around. It does not arrive loud, it arrives slow, and it arrives total. Start with Aurelius. He had spent 14 months constructing a parallel life with the meticulous care of a man who believed that parallel lines, properly maintained, never touch. He had not accounted for the wife who owned the venue. He had not accounted for a woman who walked her own rooms every morning and knew their contents better than anyone. He had not accounted for 48 hours of precise, unhurried preparation by a woman whose mother had taught her that the numbers only make sense if you've already walked the floor they came from, and Miriam had been walking that floor for 17 years. The legal consequences of the fraudulent marriage license filing were already in motion before his groomsmen had finished their hotel breakfast. The divorce, when it came, was uncontested, because a man who has been caught in the specific way Aurelius had been caught has very limited territory from which to contest anything. Then there was Odile. Odile had accepted her son's story about a quietly ended marriage because it was easier than the question it required her to ask, and she had welcomed Celestine warmly into the family's good graces, on the understanding that the previous wife was a chapter concluded. She sat in the hotel lobby for 40 minutes on a Tuesday morning while the story unraveled around her, and not one of the things she'd assumed about her son survived the sitting. Miriam sent her a car to take her home, because a woman raised by Ilse Voss does not make an old woman sit in a lobby, arranging her own dignity, without offering her an exit. Odile wrote Miriam a letter the following week. It was the most honest thing anyone in the Delacroix family had sent her in 4 years. And Serge. Serge had followed his brother's lead his whole life, and had called it loyalty, without ever examining whether the thing he was being loyal to deserved the name. Standing in a hotel lobby, watching the morning come apart, while a woman he had never once taken seriously ran every element of it with quiet authority, he understood that the following of his brother's lead had delivered him to a place he did not want to be, and that the next time someone asked him to accept a comfortable story instead of a difficult question, he would need to decide more carefully which one he actually owed his allegiance to. A quiet woman is not a weak woman. Remember that. Remember it every time the world sees a woman straightening a centerpiece in a beautiful room and decides she must be staff. The ballroom ran its next event 3 weeks later, a 50th anniversary party for a couple who had met in a hotel lobby and wanted, specifically, white peonies on every table. Miriam walked the room herself the morning of it, touched nothing, saw everything, and straightened one drape at the far window exactly the way her mother had taught her. Then she took the master key out from under her collar, held it for a moment the way she always did when she needed to remember whose rooms she was standing in, put it back, and went upstairs to start the day. If this story reminded you that the woman arranging the flowers is sometimes the woman who owns the whole garden, type "she owns the rooms" in the comments so she hears you. Share this with the one person who needs to remember their worth was never something someone else's guest list got to decide. And subscribe, because next time, the woman he tries to remove from the premises might just be the reason the premises are standing at all.